I'd like to welcome you to our report out session, the first of the year, January 19th, 2021. We are having two guests today. We have the Department of Mathematics, which will be represented by the chair, Dr. Patrick Shanahan, and we have the Cure Center, but specifically their work on restorative practices, restorative justice, represented by Shana Mahmood and Julia Wade with us. And we'll have mathematics go first, and then the restorative practices and justice work second. And we'll have brief presentations followed by some Q&A. The purpose of the sessions, just to remind you, these report out sessions, is to feature the anti-racism work of different units on campus. We want to be able to share practices and strengthen our collective anti-racism efforts. So people are aware. And finally, we want to foster a culture of inquiry. This is not finished work or unit, about sharing what we're learning along the way, asking questions, sharing dead ends, mistakes. So this is not meant to be polished and finished, but really fostering that sense of let's keep moving and working together so we can do this. So with that, I'd like to welcome Pat Shanahan to begin.
Thank you. So when you guys do this, is it better to first, actually, I don't know if, I was going to go into presentation mode, but I'm not sure if I should do that before or after I share.
It's up to you. If you want to give a little bit of context and go into your slides, that might help. Yeah.
So are there slides now sharing? Okay, maybe I'll just do it this way. It's not in presentation mode, but this is fine. So thank you for having me. This is the report out for the math department, diversity, equity, and inclusion systemic analysis. And I'm kind of glad Jen touched on this before we started, which is when we began this process, when we sort of received this charge to look at this, there was a lot of concern about, are we really expected to have some finished product in a short time frame? And so the department really began the process of the systemic analysis by talking about some sort of overriding guiding principles. And a lot of these were identified by Jen and also Dean Cho. And the first one is that this is really an ongoing process. We're not going to be delivering a finished product in a semester or even a year. The second was, it was really a tool for reflection for the department, not meant to be served as a to-do task to click all the boxes and just check things off. And the third was that we shouldn't redirect ongoing work that the department was already doing just to try to complete 8 steps listed in the systemic analysis. We should instead report the work that we've been doing and maybe reflect on that and add what we thought was appropriate. Our approach to addressing this was we first discussed it with the department in a department meeting. We then formed an ad hoc committee of faculty to discuss, analyze, and come up with a report. We presented the report to the department, had some revision after discussion, and then reported it out to the dean and then this office. The committee felt very strongly that it was such a big task, such a big question, that we needed some overriding principle to focus our attention. And so the first thing the committee did was really kind of focused in on what exactly are we trying to do with our systemic analysis? And we decided to focus very specifically on thinking about policies and climate in the math department. And do our current policies and climate reflect our goals of developing an anti-racist community that really values and promotes DEI work? Once we just sort of decided that was the question, it was then easier for us to focus in on which of the items from the systemic analysis towards action document we could look at. And those were listening to the members of our department and reviewing our infrastructure, pedagogy, and policies and processes. In doing that, we raised 4 different issues. Because of time, I'll probably just touch on 2 of them. The first issue we raised which was ongoing work, was about our syllabi that we use in the department. The Department of Mathematics, while it doesn't have a large number of majors, approximately 60, serves a vast number of students in virtually every department across campus and in every major. So we often teach about 1,500 students a semester. And we recognize that our syllabi were kind of all over the place in terms of setting a tone for our promotion of DEI. The second issue raised was looking at our department's rank and tenure standards, which we had already been looking at due to COVID sort of stuff, and recognizing they really didn't recognize all the extra work that falls on faculty of color, nor did they recognize and reward contributions to scholarship of engagement. The third item issue that we raised was our hiring practices in the department. We've tried lots of different things throughout the years, but we still seem to be really falling short a lot of times in supporting efforts and promoting DEI through different policies and practices that are used in hiring. And then finally, we really don't have good information. Like when we try and look at some reports that we get from the university, because the number of majors is small, that information is usually reported with not enough, to give you any feedback. It might identify individuals. And yet, how do we sort of get information from this broad cross-section of students that we teach across the university? So I'll probably touch just upon A and C, but certainly open to questions about any of these. So looking at question A, which was associated to syllabi, we were already talking about this before, and so it kind of fit naturally. In fact, in August, at our first department meeting of the year, we already were talking about our syllabi language that reflects our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we discussed it at that meeting in August, but we didn't really have an action plan. And it was nice that the systemic analysis sort of came out after that, and it kind of gave us focus on a way to approach it. So we started by reviewing syllabi from previous semesters. And it was interesting, in spring 2020, not one mentioned inclusion anywhere. And that's a lot. That's like 80 or 70 sections of mathematics. But a lot of them had this sort of general, very sort of generic Lions code language, like I am a lion, et cetera. In fall, the analysis showed that some reflected more DEI language, but it really wasn't universal, and it didn't really reflect our department as a whole's commitment to promoting DEI work. So based on this, we first started a discussion thread, and this was a valuable tool for us that we only started because of the online situation we're in due to COVID, which is we have a Brightspace page for the department now, where we can have discussion threads, and we posted some syllabi language that different faculty found, and then we could comment on it. And this was a great way to come into a meeting, having already discussed a lot of stuff sort of offline, or maybe it was online, but not in a department meeting. And then we do these in fall and spring, we do a faculty forum associated to student success. And so we did one focused in fall just on the topic of inclusive syllabi language. And the two faculty that organized that had a lot of great resources that they shared, including articles on inclusive language and practices that we were able to share and discuss. We drafted from that some proposed language, and then we brought it, put it back on the Brightspace page, and then brought it to the department. And then the department voted unanimously to require it starting in spring 2021. So this is the language that we voted on. What's in black is the language that we voted on in the department. But we also discussed in the department how we really wanted faculty to be free to not just put this in as boilerplate language, but to personalize it in some ways. A lot of the research that we looked at talked about how really personalizing this story really kind of reaches out to students and gives them a different feel about, oh, they didn't just copy this from a website. And so what's in black is what was voted on in the department. What's in blue happens to be what I used in my syllabus this semester, where I also sort of broaden this to also thinking about mathematical challenges that students come into the classroom with. A couple of things about this that our future outcomes will be to review syllabi to make sure that people are including it. And then a couple of comments or takeaways. The department felt very strongly about a unified approach. We didn't want to leave it up to each faculty member to potentially include syllabi language or not, because we thought that would be unfair if some faculty were including it and others weren't, and it could lead to some sort of awkward things. We wanted a really unified approach to this issue. But at the same time, as pointed out, really we wanted to make sure that faculty were free to modify or personalize the language to meet the needs of their classes and their students. For this part, the question I would pose is, we don't know a good way to efficiently sort of assess the effect of this change. We can probably talk to our math majors. That's not that hard, but there's only 60 of them. And how do we go and reach out to all these students in business calculus, in quantitative skills classes, in 300 level engineering math classes in some way that also doesn't sort of put additional burden on the students of color that have already been responding to survey after survey and focus group after focus group? We really haven't figured out a good way to sort of approach this yet. Okay, how am I on time, Jen?
You're fine.
Okay, so let me say a little bit about hiring as well before we go to any questions or comments at the end. Again, this was an area we were doing a lot of ongoing work. Ever since I've been at LMU, it's been 25 years, the department has really taken to heart trying to hire in ways to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. We haven't always had the best success with that. And so we did 2 hires recently in 2018, 2019, and 2019, 2020. And here's a couple of things we reviewed. In 2018, we had a broader range of areas in which we were hiring. Data analysis and statistics are very hot areas right now, very hard to hire. And in 2018, we had also analysis and probability in there. In 2019, it was more restricted. In 2018, we would ask applicants to include a statement of any interest or work they've done associated to DEI in a cover letter. And this could be omitted completely by a candidate, or it could be a sentence, or it could be a paragraph. Different candidates approached it differently. In 2019, we moved to requiring a separate statement on inclusion completely. So there was a statement on your scholarship, a statement on your teaching philosophy, and then a third statement now is a statement on inclusion. When we advertised our jobs in both 2018 and 2019, we did the same. The AMS and the ASA are big national organizations associated to mathematics and statistics, but the 3 in blue here are groups or organizations that focus on specific underrepresented groups in mathematics. American Women in Math, Society of Chicano and Native American Scientists and Engineers, and National Association of Mathematics, which supports African American mathematicians. In 2018, we advertised in an American Mathematical Society math jobs org thing, and that's how we collected all our paperwork. We received over 400 applications for one position in that year. In 2019, at the urging of the dean and the higher administration, we moved to the jobs.lmu thing, and we only received 60 applications, which for mathematics is strikingly small. We suffer from a real lack of diversity in STEM, and that was reflected in the applications we got in both 2018 and 2019. Both years were pretty much dismal, but given that there were so few applications in 2019, when we went to form our shortlist and look for candidates that actually, satisfied other parts of the job criteria, it was so hard to take such a small group and find qualified applicants from such a small group. So our shortlist, while our overall applications didn't reflect great diversity, in 2018, our shortlist reflected better diversity. In 2019, it was just virtually impossible to do with such a small set of applications. 2018, we successfully hired a female data scientist. In 2019, we failed the search because we just felt we couldn't find someone appropriate. So lots of issues here. for lots of different reasons, our practices are falling short. We've lost some faculty who support a lot of DEI work for lots of different reasons in the department. A great example is Herbert Medina, who just moved on to bigger and better things, but we haven't been able to replace that role in the department. Using jobs.lmu was a complete disaster. I don't know how else to put it. It created such a barrier to recruitment. You know, it's already hard enough, and then juggling different systems, at least the mathjobs.org system. Almost everyone, it's the industry standard in mathematics. Everyone has their material there. If they want to apply to LMU, they just click a button and hit send. So we have to eliminate those barriers. Another thing we recognize is the subfield of math is also often presenting a real barrier to recruitment. Certain areas are harder to hire in already. And then if you take a small number of qualified by field applicants, and then you throw on hoping to hire for diversity as well, it's just the numbers become ridiculously small. So what are we going to try to do? Well, we unanimously voted as a department that our next tenure track hire is going to focus solely on supporting underrepresented groups in STEM. We're going to throw out any idea of trying to restrict it to a specific area of mathematics. Instead, we're going to look for faculty that have had a track record and an interest and experience in supporting underrepresented groups, whether it be through mentoring, teaching, whatever. We're going to leave that part of it open, but we're going to throw out data science, algebra, whatever. We're going to continue to collaborate with the OIA and the dean to investigate different types of hiring practices. We've talked about targeted hiring, opportunity hiring, hiring at rank, cluster hiring. Anything we can use, we're going to try to employ. We're going to continue and try to expand our efforts recruiting by working with these different organizations that support underrepresented groups in mathematics through conferences and making sure we advertise there and other sorts of programs. And we're absolutely going to use mathjobs.org unless the university just tells us we can't, which I don't think they will. I know we've got Tina's support on not having to use it. If we don't want to, we can use something that doesn't create this barrier. And then we will continue. It won't be necessary in, I think, the next tenure track hire where our focus is on supporting underrepresented groups in STEM. But for any hire from here on out, the department is committed to continuing to require a statement on diversity and inclusion in any tenure track hire we do. This is what we asked for, in case you're curious. So in our job ad, we had this statement that we're committed to broadening participation, and then we're asked to include a statement describing experience, demonstrating ability, and or interest in promoting inclusion and diversity in math sciences. And again, that's an entirely separate statement that is just like when we list, here's the required documents, you know, it's the CV, it's a cover letter, it's a statement on your teaching philosophy, a statement on your scholarship and your scholarly program, and then this statement on inclusion. So this is sort of my comment. I didn't really talk about this in the department, but as chair, this is something I've really noticed, and this is the math person in me. The just lack of diversity in STEM creates what I would call a chaotic system. You can make these relatively small changes, like moving to LMU jobs, and suddenly there's these drastic, out of proportion, huge differences in outcomes. Little things you do, like tweaking what subfield of algebra you ask for, will have these totally unintended consequences. And everything we do that kind of restricts, because the pool is so small, really creates these additional barriers to trying to hire in the way we want to. And then all of this, in some sense, really is addressing a symptom of the much deeper problem, which is there's a problem in the STEM pipeline. We need to help fix the number of students that are moving into the mathematical sciences or STEM in general and pursuing doctorates and going on to careers as faculty. Thank you. That's pretty much it.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Pat, if we go back to the gallery view and you stop sharing, you'll see that magically you have a big audience.
Oh, I do. Oh,
and
okay.
We already have a question. Ray, would you go ahead and ask?
Sure. Hey, thank you, Patrick, for that presentation. I was just curious if in addition to using other job posting websites, if you've also thought about using LinkedIn. And also, aside from LinkedIn, I believe that alumni relations and or CPD also has databases with alums who have come out of our science and engineering school. And if you were also thought about using them as resources.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent question. Yeah, we have a wonderful LinkedIn site that I actually administer it, but it's called LMU Mathematics. And it's only open to LMU mathematics alum, although one engineering student who was a minor snuck in there at some point. But I can't just kick that person out now. So yeah, absolutely. Advertising there is a wonderful idea, and definitely something we should do.
Yeah, and I almost forgot that I guess LMU recently launched the Pride, correct? So there's also that as well. I see Julia nodding.
Right. Something else we're excited to talk about, I see Heather is here now, is Heather had recently reached out. I forgot what, is it Cottrell? Heather, you can correct me. Cottrell Emerging Scholars Program or something like that. So it's an opportunity that I'm going to talk to my department about this Thursday, where you can host postdoctoral faculty in math that will do like an mock interview with you at LMU to give them experience with how they would interview at a school like LMU. Again, Heather, please correct me if I'm misstating any of what I read on the one website link you sent me. So we're going to talk to the faculty about getting involved, something like that. So you can get some students, or I guess postdoctoral faculty, to know who LMU is, and we can identify these faculty and maybe sort of create some additional bridges there.
Yeah, it's a program that is where LMU faculty would mentor those who are on the market, with the idea that they could apply for positions here, but then also it could just be a professional service to help with interview preparation for whatever other jobs they're applying for around the country. But again, I think a great way to get LMU's name out there and out front with scholars that might not initially look at LMU as a potential employer.
Thank you. I noticed that Heather put the Black PhD Network, or BDN, in the link, and I'm going to ask Stephen Neal, who's part of our staff and very connected to BDN, just to say a few words about how that might be helpful, not just to math, but to other departments.
Yes, the Black Doctoral Network is it's a national organization, consortium of African-American scholars, professionals, graduate and undergraduate students. And in addition to just being a professional network, they host a national conference and a regional conference. And the regional conference last year was at, or the year before was at LMU. And it's just an opportunity for scholars and professionals and students to present at the conference, and also to receive professional development support. They have plenary sessions, breakout sessions, career fairs, and an undergraduate student poster competition. And I've gone for the past, I think, 3 or 4 years to not only accompany students to present their research, but also to represent LMU and to interface with aspiring faculty, and to just tell them about LMU, let them know about open positions, and also encourage them to consider LMU as a destination for future employment as professors. So I'm happy to, have some conversations about, upcoming opportunities to do some perhaps recruitment and networking with aspiring faculty.
Thank you. And OIA is available to support and extend your recruitment at some of the conferences that are specifically targeted towards the populations you're looking at. So we're out of time here, but can we just express our appreciation to Dr. Shanahan and the mathematics department? I think what's very clear is your commitment. It's unequivocal. Your values, the syllabus language, the statement. You're doing things in a very unequivocal manner. I think that can really be a model to the rest of the university. So thank you for sharing your practices with us.
Thank you.
So now we will turn to our restorative justice practices on campus with Shana Mahmood from the Cures Center for Urban Resilience and Julia Wade, who is overseeing these practices through student affairs. So we'd like to welcome you to our report out.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm just going to pull up our presentation that we'd like to share with you today. So we're a little bit different in that Sheena and I are not necessarily a department, but we're a partnership. And so there's beauty in this partnership that we hope to explore with you because we do kind of represent some different areas. So as Dr. Abe mentioned, my name is Julia Wade. And so I actually operate out of student conduct. And I'm here today to share more with you about this partnership with Shana and the work that she does in LMU Restore. So part of this lens is really going to come from our work in student affairs and that student lens, our work with staff in our area, and really, drawing on the wealth of knowledge that Shana has as a practitioner with this work. So we're a little bit different, like I said, in that we'll share a little bit about what we do first because it's just so different, and then kind of jump into our more critical analysis of, kind of thinking through some of this guidance that OIA has provided us. So I'll let Shana just, say hello, invite Shana to say hello and introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. It's a real pleasure for us to be here today. Thank you for having us. I oversee the Restorative Justice Project at the Center for Urban Resilience. And as you may know, the center's mission is to work with communities to develop resilience. And to do this, we conduct research on social and environmental topics. We manage programs with community groups, K-12 schools, as well as higher ed institutions. And we consider restorative practices a way to further build resilient communities. I just wanted to mention that Cures offers a land acknowledgement to the Tongva people. This particular picture is of the Key, the space where Tongva come together and have conversations with each other about important matters. And I also want to acknowledge the Maori people of New Zealand and other Indigenous peoples across the globe, because this work is based on traditions and values coming from those populations. And we really want to honor them as we talk about this work. And with restorative justice practices, just to make sure we're all operating under the same definition, we're purporting that this is a philosophy based on principles that emphasize the importance of positive relationships as central to building community and involve processes that restore relationships when harm has occurred. And what's really important to remember about this work is that rather than us coming in and suggesting how a community of people should relate and how they should problem solve when conflict occurs, we're actually invited in and offer these services in a way that allows for participation. We're not looking for buy-in.
And just another way to think about, what this is or what it looks like. This is a less kind of visual sense, but you could also think of this along a continuum or in, a pyramid format of prevention and intervention. And so what does that relate to? Well, harm, thinking about how are we cultivating a sense of belonging and building that sense of community that Sheena mentioned, and the practices that we use to do that, including community building circles. So if we were all together actually sitting, in a physical circle, but in a way that we've been able to do it virtually is still gathering together and inviting folks to speak one at a time about their perspective and experience, and then examining and looking at our processes, engaging in fair processes. And that's, a term that means different things to different people. But for us, it absolutely means from the lens of, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then how can we intervene, or what response can we have when it has been harm that's occurred? And so the tools that Restorative Practices offers are really, questions and what's called a conference that brings people together to have conversations that really ask, what happened, who's been affected and how, and what can be done to repair the harm. And then so there's a couple intermediary practices, problem solving circles, again, using a circle format, but with a more specific intention to address or maybe have a conversation around a specific incident, and then responding to critical matters. So we'll share some more examples of what that looks like a little bit later. But this is really, a tool and opportunity to have dialogue on our campus. And also, though, experience accountability and call in accountability when we need to.
And here we have examples of how college campuses are implementing restorative practices. So there are quite a few universities across the nation, including Loyola University in Chicago, Occidental College right here in Los Angeles. They're running community building circles, and those circles are being led by students, which we really want to honor. Also, looking at University of San Diego down south of us, they have launched the Restorative Justice Network for Catholic Campuses, and we're actually a part of that team in helping to work on their planning committee and getting involved with the network of campuses across the country that happen to be Catholic. Also, we'd like to just really quickly give you a background on how we came to be. So in 2011, the Center for Restorative Justice started at Loyola Law School. And in 2013, that's when Dr. Eric Strauss invited the center to be housed at Cures. And from there, we've been able to reach dozens of primary and secondary schools, representing a variety of school districts, especially those that are serving children at a 70% or more rate of free and underserved lunches. So trying to reach different levels of populations through this work. Also, we've instituted the Cure Summer Institute. So each summer we invite educators and administrators to come in and learn about restorative practices and how to implement it within their classrooms and at their school sites. It's also notable that we've created a partnership with the Division of Student Affairs, and that happened in 2018, and Julia will talk a little bit more about that shortly. In addition, in the last couple of years, we have worked with 12 department chairs. So the Office of Intercultural Affairs had contacted us to offer an orientation. And so with support from OIA, we were able to reach a number of departments. Also, I want to point out that we earlier in 2020, we launched the Southern California Restorative Justice Consortium, inviting organizations across the region to come together and talk about lessons learned. Also, we're conducting research on their implementation practices, and then working on joint fundraising projects.
And just to expand a little bit more on that partnership that Sheena mentioned, it was really born in 2018. And so we've spent, a lot of time invested in training our staff, and both in community building practices and restorative conferencing, and engaging in an apprenticeship program for our facilitators. And some additional highlights, we'll talk more about our partnerships a little bit later, but engaging with sorority and fraternity life around, conversations that are important to their community, and then, connecting with groups such as the learning community, who really kind of, grabbed onto this language and these techniques. And in that 2019 cohort, really, utilizing it when an issue came up in their cohort in some of those first few weeks that they were together. And so we've added this language to our community standards and really made this available. That's how this all started, is really kind of doing an audit of our practices and seeing, okay, in conduct, maybe we need a different way to address some of those issues that arise out of fractured relationships between students in our population. And so we have facilitated 7 conferences involving, what would be policy violations of theft, disruptive behavior, and vandalism, just as examples. And then I think most significantly in this, virtual time, we've been able to welcome our students using community building circles. So all 70 sections of our orientation 1000 and 2000 for new and transfer students utilize community building circles. So for example, during, the 3 weeks of our anti-racism curriculum that we did with new students, one of the questions that we asked to build community to start off with, just a quick practice, is what's the meaning of your name? And what does that have to do with your identity? Or if you don't know the story, share something that you'd like us to know about you. So really utilizing this as a manner to engage with one another. And, we've just received really positive feedback about how that has welcomed students and, allowed them to know that they kind of made the right choice about coming to our campus. So just to shift a little bit, I think it was a little bit difficult for Shannon and I, because we really feel like all of these 8 areas of analysis are questions that we've asked ourselves as we're doing this work on this campus and, as we've been invited into spaces. But I think one of the biggest things is, for this slide kind of called returning to our roots, in thinking about infrastructure, policies, processes, how we're approaching this work, and as we're being invited into spaces. So, and these are some of the questions that we invited our participants in one of our most recent circle trainings to think about. So we have some answers, but it's also, I think, like, our previous presenter was sharing, this work is not done. We constantly need to be asking ourselves, how are we really honoring the reason that the Maori practices originated, right? A disproportionate number of Indigenous people were being brought through a justice system that didn't bring any justice. And so having an alternative way to respond. And then if we're saying we're going to be anti-racist, how can we make sure that we're not co-opting this work in an institution? If we're implementing something new or trying something new and inviting people to participate, are we engaging those people as we are developing this on our campus and within our institution? And language, how powerful language is, as we are talking about this and really thinking about, restorative practices as a philosophy and way of being rather than just a program. And then this piece about accountability that I mentioned, in what ways can we really use these practices to call in accountability across all the different issues that we might be facing on our campus, and how can stakeholders really be, brought together to make decisions for themselves and to interfere as least as possible with other processes if we don't need to. So that was kind of, one piece that we wanted to highlight. And then really thinking about this idea of structural diversity. So, Shana and I are very aware of and call into the spaces that we are 2, white women engaging in these practices. And are we always the best, to serve or to be present in spaces when there is conflict, or even just for certain community building exercises? And so we also wanted to just highlight that, this is why there's the beauty of this team and this facilitator work group that we're engaging with. So folks that do have different individual identity backgrounds and come from different departments, and really making sure that we have this available to our community, so that those are assets that we're highlighting. and so folks can see themselves, reflected, and this, our identities as facilitators do influence the work. And so it's something that we're constantly kind of checking in about and assessing and are, having open dialogue about. And I just wanted to highlight an example of, how, this was present a little bit for me, being asked to go into a space with a service organization, and just how it's manifesting with our students, because they were really interested in having a conversation about, race and the changing dynamics of their student organization. And it was incredibly to be part of, an organization examining what that meant for them, and how, individuals of color were the ones impacted by mostly having these conversations. But also just the bravery and courage of that organization to really, try to take a step in having a difficult conversation, and how this could be used as a tool, and, a way to take a step forward with action, and coming up with some action steps of how to make that environment more inclusive. And then another example is just, with our most recent ASLMU administration, kind of wanting to create more connectivity with other student groups, and at the same time maybe misstepping a little bit in trying to, address ways that they wanted to work with other populations without having a conversation with them before, without really trying to build that connectivity and those bridges. And so how we were able to engage those groups, and having, a conversation about what would it take to really build a meaningful partnership, and to really say that, they could work in a way that made sense for that student population. And then that takes time, and the statement of saying, that that's something that they're interested in was not enough. So Shana, I don't know if you want to speak any to that, but.
Just also that in our trainings, we emphasize the importance of checking in with the participants and making sure that they have supporters with them, people there who can, so that there's a higher comfort level. And also we make sure the facilitators talk to participants before they even enter the room, just to check in and make sure that that they're feeling safe, and that this is and understand that this is a structured space where they can feel free to share.
And so just to speak a little bit more to our partnerships, again, we were really trying to focus on being invited in, and that means kind of different steps at different times, but we have had the opportunity to work with a breadth of, student organizations through ethnic and intercultural services, our Nation Service Corps. We're having conversations with our student workers and with our graduate student organization this semester, and then looking at how we can integrate this into curriculum when available. So through partnerships with Bellarmine Forum, but also our Nation Leadership Institute out of Student Affairs. And as I mentioned, kind of service organizations, and where the organizations that I said, are naturally drawing students from all over campus, and really may, want to have meaningful dialogue around topics that are relevant to them. So we did an event in the fall, and then we have 2 upcoming opportunities to collaborate with the Bellarmine Forum in February and in March, inviting our students to, and our whole community, to learn more about folks who are doing this work elsewhere, in the world with their careers, and also just sharing a little bit more, like we did today with you, about what restorative practices are, and exploring that through the lens of restorative justice and transformative justice as part of Bellarmine Forum. But that's another reason why we wanted to do this presentation, because we're just very open, and we want to meet other folks. We have big, ideas about, I think, what this could be, obviously with the guidance and input of our community, but our plans are to continue, utilizing community building and problem solving circles with our new students. There's plans for a service learning community through the Center for Service and Action that would use circles on a regular basis or weekly basis with students to connect. Student staff employment, continuing to use this in residence life. And then for, faculty, staff, students, community members, in our monthly facilitator meetings, we're doing circles with staff, right? We all need a space too, to process and to share and to build those connections with one another. And then continuing to do so out of, student conduct, and when issues arise that kind of involve harm. And again, how can we keep responding or or being proactive in our conversations on that prevention side around race, around elections, around whatever matters most to our community. Yeah. And I don't know if you want to add anything else, Sheena.
Just that it's a flexible structure so that we're really meeting the needs of the community and answering the call for to be able to talk about these important and critical issues. It's important for the community to dictate what the conversation should be about versus us imposing our viewpoints on what we should be talking about. And then just to mention in terms of training opportunities and needs, so we offer a community building circle training, as well as a 2.5-day conference training where we help train people on how to facilitate conversations around conflict and harm. And we're really interested in exploring a couple of other topics that we've broached with our working group, just preliminarily. So looking at white supremacy embedded in institutional structure and also community cultural wealth.
And I think, yeah, exactly like Shana said, you know, these are conversations that need to be had as facilitators and as folks doing this work. So it's really just been like, you know, another way of responding to, you know, what the needs are. But there's so much more work and training that needs to be done to make sure we're acknowledging, you know, what we don't know or what we do know as facilitators, and having those conversations within our own community of facilitators to appropriately learn and respond and grow in our facilitation.
And I know we're running a little bit long, but I'll really quickly read this statement from Becky McCammon, who's an author out of Minnesota. So restorative practices must commit to racial equity and acknowledging a history of harm and injustice that is persistently present and profound in our schools each day. Restorative practices is anti-racist work, are the work of decolonizing our schools and reconciling how we all hurt and how some inherit a legacy of loss and injustice.
Yeah. So thanks everyone. I think
Thank you.
we just have some space and I'll stop sharing for, you know, questions. And we're happy to have further conversations with folks too at another time.
Well, can we express our appreciation for your presentation? Thank you very much for sharing with us. And at this time, any questions, observations? I think it's been very familiar within student affairs, but the library, have you heard of this? What's been the reach in other areas? What questions do you have? Let's open it up.
I'll start. Listening to the mathematics presentation and the Kira's presentation, especially for the mathematics, you know, library we can relate to, as well as with along with ITS, with the hiring and retention of people of color. And because in our field, it's like we mentioned, is predominantly nearly 90% white and white women specifically. And so, you know, getting creative and figuring out and networking and building those relationships, you know, with people who work with those who would be exceptional to wanting to become a librarian in the field and who are BIPOC. And in terms of the second presentation, I just put it in the chat that, you know, and I paraphrased it a little bit, but, you know, if we're trying to be an anti-racist institution, how do we make sure we are not co-opting this work? And I think that's a concern on a lot of our minds, you know, not just within our area, but even beyond our areas, of just making sure that our, like LMU in this case, is not just doing this for the sake of doing it, like, hey, we read Kendi's book, we're popular now, you know, like that sort of thing. That we really are going in depth on this subject matter. But what I also liked about the second presentation was that you're not only looking at within your area, but you're looking at beyond your area, like what relationships we can build, what relationships we can strengthen, what relationships we should seek out. And so even giving us some ideas too. And so, just a great set of resources we have here on campus alone. So thank you very much to both groups for today's presentations.
Thank you as always, Nicole, for your insight, observations. Others, questions, comments? Joe?
Hi. I have a question for Julie and Shayna. Just wondering what the plan is in terms of recruiting more facilitators and to diversify. You mentioned yourself, like 2 white women. How do you plan on like diversifying the work or the labor of doing this work throughout the campus?
Yeah, so I mean, the goal is that, our intention this year was to get like 8 more facilitators through an apprenticeship program for conferencing specifically, so for responding to harm. That's been challenging because we only have, about 200 residential students. So in terms of like responding to student issues, it's looked a little different this year. But I mean, I really, our work group that meets monthly, is made up of a variety of folks that hold those different identities. So in terms of community building work, I feel like we're in a good place of that representation and diversification, and it's just about continuing to provide people support and kind of strengthening those skills around the work that they're doing. So Shayna, I don't know if you want to add anything else onto that, but I think it's always at the forefront of our minds. And so I think we have the group of folks. It's just a matter of them continuing to do the work, to gain more experience, to have more opportunities to do so. And and we're open. I think that's another thing is anyone who's interested, we'd love to hear from you and we'd love to talk to you.
And I think also working with the Southern California Restorative Justice Consortium has given us access to folks in the entire Southern Cal region. And our hope is to recruit by word of mouth and also opening up training opportunities where tuition is not a barrier for folks. So really being conscientious and intentional about casting a wider net.
And the opportunity to like collaborate with other campuses and share facilitators. I mean, that's, Shay and I's big dream of, how can we look at regionally or nationally now with Zoom, the assets that we have on different campuses and really, again, about responding to needs, like how can we, share kind of, resources and think about things in that way.
Great, thank you.
I had a question if there's time. And it was a question for Patrick. And my question was, is the mathematics department are doing anything to develop or mentor students from underrepresented populations for either STEM fields or even the professorate, and beginning in the K through 12 sector?
Well, the math department has a long history of leadership in different programs at LMU, like Access and McNair. Directors of those programs had both been faculty in the math departments at different points. In terms of the K through 12, we have some faculty that are doing math circles at local schools, but I haven't thought of it as really a long-term or an approach that's focused on underrepresented groups necessarily. It was more just focused on whoever was volunteering to come to those math circles or whatever. But certainly at LMU, in terms of our students moving on and pursuing graduate work in STEM fields, there's a lot of faculty that have been pretty involved. But I mainly Access and McNair were the programs through which they were involved.
All right, thank you.
I'm not sure if I totally answered your question, Stephen.
I think so.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll say so just because we're at time now. And I want to thank all our presenters and thank you for coming to our session and for the opportunity to learn together. So we appreciate your time, your preparation, your efforts, and look forward to how we can support you and support each other. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.